the ability, as I said, to draw people in to help co-create whatever the new space might be. Now that we've got the first time in history, really the ability for everybody to have an input to a conversation.
Hi everyone, this is a collective forum of experts within the ever-evolving workplace sector. We toyed for some time throughout lockdown on how best to put together and share our insight into the workplace. It's an ever-evolving, saturated topic with everyone fighting for airtime. By sharing this conversational piece between us as a collective, we hope it will better benefit our network in the future. So without further ado, we have Victoria Stairs, owner of VIC Ltd, along with workplace consultant and analyst Mark Kitchen. We have Tim Allen, who's the managing director of Aberely, and Miles McLeod, workplace consultant of Lovell. Last but not least, myself, Robin Macney. I'm VIC Ltd's interiors and brand specialist. I'm going to step back at the beginning of this kind of conversation, especially as a creative, to allow the workplace strategists and experts to take the floor. I don't know about you guys, but I'm currently holed up in my daughter's nursery. It's undecorated. I've kind of managed to get myself a little cut screen here where you don't get to see any of the plaster marks and the we've done. My wife's also working from home at the moment as well, which is a complete nightmare. We're certainly in need of a meeting room booking system. We've got a little 15-month-old daughter who discovered walking throughout lockdown. So with no childcare, we're shift work at the moment. How about you guys?
I can start there. I think I'm quite an interesting case study for myself. I'm polar opposite you, Robin. I currently live in a town centre accommodation on my own without a garden. So you can imagine the lengths and breadths of fun that I've been experiencing while on lockdown. The anecdote for this conversation really leads to the fact that being locked down on my own has led to obviously being able to work, which has been a godsend to channel some time into, but at the same time, isolation is not just the word that you put to this period of time, it's definitely a feeling. And I will hold my hands up. I'm one of these that can't wait to get back into an office environment and get beyond this computer screen that we've become so accustomed to.
Yeah, it's not the same, is it?
Yeah, not at all.
No.
Not at all.
Miles, how are you getting on?
Yeah, not too bad. I mean, I'm someone who has always worked very transiently anyway, since the beginning of my career. So adapting to working from home full time was not too difficult for me, and I'm quite grateful for that. I know that obviously for a lot of people it was really quite difficult if they've been working 100% of their time in an office. However, I mean, continuous home working is definitely not the future. I am massively missing the office, just the camaraderie of it, just seeing people, chance encounters, bumping into people, and just, I think as good as this technology we have is at connecting all of us, there are still those foibles that need to be ironed out, and you just don't get the same connection as you would do face to face. And we're social beings, and we yearn for social interaction. Even the introverts of us, and I'm not one of them, but they're the people that we still have to take into account. They still want that element of interaction, even if it is just a quiet coffee with someone during the working day in the office. So yeah, I'm missing it quite a bit. I've tried to work in the most activity-based way possible at home, which is a struggle. I'm trying to kind of simulate the office experience. So at the moment, I'm currently in the bedroom because my girlfriend is downstairs and we do sit opposite each other. So I don't want to be disturbing her if she's going to be on a call as well. So this is a case of me working activity-based way where I come to my space to make phone calls. But it's never going to replace the office. And obviously we've got to be advocates of it.
Yeah, I think we'll all agree with that statement. And one thing that has cropped up over our past kind of couple of briefing sessions with you guys and us as a collective is your haircut.
Yeah, so I mean,
very jealous.
It's in a good state at the moment to a certain degree, but I looked a bit. I don't know how to describe it, but it was very, very short, and I looked a bit like a thumb for a couple of weeks. So I've had the time to grow it back out now. But the lockdown haircut at first, I wasn't too keen on it, but it was worth a punt.
Well, just be thankful, Miles, that you've got hair that grows back. For some of us, we've reached a point where there's not that much hair to be playing with anymore. So
yeah, true. So yeah, I tried going a bit rogue with this part of my hair, but now I'm trying this bit. So this is getting a bit scraggly at the moment, but
next phase,
see how far that goes.
The return to office phase.
Yeah, exactly. Testing out all the different looks.
Brilliant.
Well, in that case, I'll go next. So yeah, I'm also holed up in central London. In our place, fortunately, we've got a bit of outside space here, so I think that makes a world of difference. As I was saying times before, I'm now feeling tethered to a desk that I've not been and not had part of my kind of daily routine in years. Like most of us in consulting, you're used to traveling, being out on client sites or popping back in the office or whatever it is, but not tethered to one location largely for pretty much all day, every day. And although, as Miles is saying, you can sort of do a bit of alternative working around an apartment, my partner also works out of another room, so when the two of us are into the only other main room, not easy to be having conversations at the same time. So we tend to try and distance slightly, so at least to get a bit more focus. But yeah, it means that you end up kind of in one place for a large chunk of the day. And I think for introverts, it's actually not necessarily a good thing, because if you spend your time literally just on sort of Zoom calls or Google Hangout or WebEx or Teams or whatever it is, but basically it's video conferencing. If you're spending a large chunk of the day on video conferencing, it's not really where you want to be. There's no sense of time away from anybody. So I think actually for some introverts, they're really struggling at the moment. Weirdly, I think there was always that sense of if you're at home, then surely that helps. But if you're on video calls a lot, not necessarily.
I'll share my experience. So I moved house during lockdown, and for the majority of people watching this, I imagine it's at least you managed to move house. However, a lot of my things were in storage. So I had been without any of my furniture, without a desk. So even as a consultant, not having a space to work on for about 8 to 9 weeks has been really, really challenging. I've really struggled actually in being able to get a setup and just feeling comfortable. So I don't mind taking my calls outside, but actually being able to work efficiently has been really challenging for me. Luckily, being quite driven, I've still managed to do it, and I'm still succeeding in my work. But I think the pressure of not having your own furniture is sort of another extreme of lockdown, which not a lot of people, I guess, have faced. Safe to say it's now all arrived. And I did take a week off last week, which I have actually said to a couple of people this morning, the amount of time, and sort of alluding to Tim's point, the amount of time that is being spent on the computer through video telephone conferencing is actually something that I've struggled with. More from the sense of I've been absolutely exhausted. So last week, when I had my week off, I didn't spend any time on the laptop at all. I wanted to make sure that I had a full digital detox as much as possible. And I've heard that phrase quite a lot and never really understood it until lockdown. So I felt quite overwhelmed with the amount of meetings that could be a very quick 5-10 minute phone call that have now got a full Zoom setup and now requiring dedicated time. And actually people are getting more into the habit of setting up a Zoom call than just picking up the phone. And I think there has to be a happy balance, which I don't think has been found yet. And, you know, maybe in the future will be, but we are obviously going to need to work differently. So I think for me, the overload in additional technology, and, you know, I'm one for emailing as often as possible. I just think it's been quite a lot recently. So I think for me going forward, I'm really going to have to think about how I manage that. And I didn't actually realize the impact it had on me until last week, where I could actually turn off. So a couple of things: no furniture, too many Zoom calls, and obviously I genuinely do miss the social interaction, which Miles has alluded to. I think Miles and I, we've worked together. We know what it's like when we're in the hustle and bustle of an office as well before, but I can't see that in the future coming back quickly. So everybody wanting to get back to the office to see people, it's going to be an interesting dynamic because it's going to be phased returns. We're not going to be able to collaborate as we once used to. So we'll be interested as we go through this conversation to hear our predictions on that. But yeah, missing people also.
Everyone's missing the old version of the office, the socially distanced version of the office that, I mean, now many offices are starting to reopen. It's not the same experience. It's tarnishing the experience of the office. And I think because a lot of people, I think they will return to a socially distanced office and be like, well, I'm not enjoying this at all.
Yeah, what's the point?
I'm so conscious of keeping my distance from everyone. I'm constantly on edge. I feel more anxious. Why wouldn't I just continue working from home until all of this blows over, or we have a vaccine? I think that's the reality of it, because I went into our office last week, and that has now been adapted to adhere to social distancing. And although it's very clean and done a very good job of putting all the signage and the protocols in place, it's just not the same environment that I remember, and it's not what I miss. And that's why, I mean, it is only for essential work only, and I don't need to go into the office. I don't need to go and pick up physical samples like the designers do. So I'm going to continue working from home, but I honestly don't feel like I'm missing out on much, because it's not the same experience as a typical office. It's not representative.
The real 22 miles, isn't it, I think, because at the moment, aside from Mark on this call, 4 of us are working from home with partners, always on telephone calls. We're sat in one room or the other. We're always overhearing conversations. Doesn't allow us to focus as much, but at the same time, going back into that office environment, it's not the office that we left. It really is.
Exactly.
And I think it's starting to hit people that it is going to take a while. So working on the assumption that it is going to take a little bit longer to get to that sort of post-social distancing working habit, to be back in the space to be able to do that. So looking a little bit more long-term post-vaccine, then I think people are beginning to realise now, you're seeing some of that coming out in some of the surveys that are creeping in, that, you know, when the lockdown started, it was a bit of a, and I'm being wildly sweeping generalisations on it, but initially with the lockdown, there's a bit of a sense of, you know, it's a trial and it's an experiment, and not surprisingly, I think people's responses to it have sort of ebbed and flowed a little bit. And whilst we're now getting to a sense that we're having to create some routine around the way that we work from home, because that's what it is, we're having to create something. It's not as though we've been asked to, we've been forced to. But I think it's starting to dawn on people this could be for a few more months yet, and I think that's going to pose problems. I know that it's, you know, the last week or so for me, it's that sense of, as you start to think about work further forward, so as some clients are starting to come back looking at proposals how to undertake work, that, you know, I'm having to think about, well, how do I do all of this virtually? So of course on a classic consulting model, and it doesn't matter what consulting world you're in, you know, across the consulting world, it's largely a case of spending time out with the client on their site with their people. It doesn't matter what you're consulting on. And now we can't really do that. So you're having to start to think through, you know, it actually sort of upends the way that we even think about the way that we undertake our work. And that's going to be for some sort of foreseeable time. So I think it's reaching that sense of understanding now of, you know, it's quite real for a while.
I think at times it ties back to what we're trying to say around kind of terminologies. Tim, I think you've got an optimistic view on how we're looking at describing our kind of current situation and where we're heading in the future around the workplace. Miles, you have a take on that as well. Do you guys want to allude on your preferences?
Okay, well, I'll go first.
That was everybody waiting. That's one of the joys, isn't it, of this? You're trying to take your visual cues on who's going to chat first. Miles, why don't you start?
So what you want to just kind of talk about what our view of the future is looking like?
No, so we're at the moment, we're at a crossroads at the moment where we're trying to kind of define our current situation and define the future. So we're looking at how we're kind of describing to our occupiers and agents and landlords the current situation we find ourselves in, and then why we're doing this.
I think you had, did you have pre and post pandemic, I think?
Yeah. So I think, because I think we've got to be careful with using pre and post vaccine, because it can be seen as a bit optimistic. Obviously, there has been talk in the media that we may not even find a vaccine. We may have to live with the coronavirus, but it's just a case of managing it, whether it's through herd immunity or there are further developments. I mean, I'm not a scientist, but we might get to that stage where we realise that it's not attainable. We can't actually get one. So pre and post vaccine, I know that's being thrown around quite a lot, but I just think you've got to be careful with using that. That's why I would probably say pre and post pandemic, because post pandemic could mean that coronavirus is still around. We haven't got a vaccine. People can still be infected by coronavirus, but it's not got as high an infection rate where it's still considered a pandemic, where it kind of dies down to a point where it's still around, it still can be caught, it's still infecting people, but not to the same extent as it is now. So that's probably the way that I would term the pre and post of look at, and how we're looking at how that's influencing design, I think.
Yeah, I think it's, and we're all trying to find some way, I think, of the description of really the difference between a socially distanced workplace and a workplace that no longer needs to be socially distanced. I think I'm taking a more positive view, that I'm hopeful that there will be a vaccine. And therefore pre and post vaccine is a nice, quick, easy way to say it. Often if I'm actually putting it into narrative format, then it's sort of vaccine brackets, treatment brackets, for whatever version of the ways, or as we were just saying a little bit beforehand, whether it's sort of shorter and longer term. But I think in terms of the conversations around the workplace, it's really helpful to have that sense of whatever wording we put around it, just that view of what are we describing that is within that socially distanced type of space, and then the post-socially distanced space. So maybe we'll have to go into acronyms instead, I don't know, as post-socially distanced space. If you're going to enunciate that clearly, it does seem to take too long almost in a conversation. So,
and Mark, I think you had a point to touch on.
There's two ways of looking at it for me. It's the post and pre-pandemic or vaccine is quite right, the way that the human entity side of it should look at things, but then you've got the way that the workplace and the facilities should be looking at it, and it's almost a reactive and then proactive approach. So right now is your reactive, you have to react to weekly government announcements, you have to react to new legislation, everything coming out, you have to just simply react to get your workplace safe enough to get people back to work. Once that period of reaction has gone out the way and all that headspace has been taken up by what have I got to do now, what have I got to do now, once you've got yourself in a position where, okay, we've reacted, we're safe, we'll phase back into work, then you can start to trail of thoughts of, so what does the future look like? And you shift to that proactivity, and the proactivity in our direction is people asking us, you know, what does this look like? What's it going to be? And in a period after what we've just had, and unprecedented being a word, I think it's the proactivity needs to be, we need to find out, not that we need to start telling.
Like certainly for me, again, having a bit of reflection last week, my day starts at 5:15, 5:30 normally, and I'd be on the train straight away, going to the gym, then going into client offices. And I guess the positive is I've been able to have a lie-in and not have to get up and do that until 7 a.m. But actually that busy pace is what makes me me. And there's part of me that's quite unsure about going back to that very quick pace of life, because I'm not really sure how my body's going to adapt very, very quickly. But also to the point of, we are out there with our clients, but our clients are not there in the same sense. There's no point me running myself into the ground and driving as we always have done, because by the time we get there, it's probably we're going to need to set up yet another Zoom call or video telephone conferencing to have a range of conversations from an office that is completely empty and in the same environment as home. I think there's a real piece around being able to differentiate your home working and to your home. I think that as a mental barrier is huge, and something that if we do continue to make adaptations in the future, there should be a lot of questions about how clients are going to support their businesses. Are they going to start funding, working from home ergonomic chairs or correct desk setup? There's going to be a potential awful amount of spend that needs to happen. I know certainly with one of my clients, I'm getting quite a lot of emails, particularly this week, about ergonomic chairs, and actually this particular client isn't funding that, but they were getting an awful lot of questions, which is great for the furniture suppliers, but yet they're not able to supply because of the pandemic. So I think sort of how we go forward with that as well is going to be, very different.
Yes. And getting the right space. I mean, there were reports in the paper of the weekend around developers taking a view now that some who are, have got recent or have got developments that are actually coming online now, they're starting to look at how they can brand the spaces differently. So rather than there being a second bedroom, for example, some of the residential ones are now saying, well, look, you've got bedroom plus an office or a workspace, with that view that, you know, they're already starting to think about the fact that as people are thinking of new, or anybody, I guess, who's in the market for a new home, thinking about it, if it's a city-based one, is where can I perhaps find some space that's going to be slightly separate to undertake the work in? As we were all just saying, we're finding spots and corners and bedrooms and playrooms and kitchens or whatever else to do bits of work in. And if the future is going to be a little bit more of that distributed working pattern, say developers are already onto that sense of how do we sell that different type of space into the market, which you can completely understand, because right now, if anybody is looking, then you want to make the most of people's thought patterns around that sense of, well, I wouldn't mind some sort of slightly separate space to be working that's disconnecting from the family. So then even senses around, well, do we move away from, I don't want to open the whole open plan working debate in terms of the commercial environment, but in terms of the residential, you know, a large chunk of us, we're in an apartment which is largely sort of open plan through, a sense that some of the developers are saying, do we move away from even that into the future so you can carve out different types of spaces? So we talk about the office, but actually I wonder what it's going to be for home into the future as well.
It's also about the amount of space you need as well, and actually being clever with the space that you're working in, and sort of just taking it back to the corporate side for a little bit. We've had a couple of conversations with some of our partners in the industry around occupiers that are already looking to drive down their square footage in the future. And I'm sort of in two minds around that, really. I think in the long term, there is the requirement and there will be a need to reduce square footage based on this new way of working that's going to come in terms of COVID-19 and the impacts that it's had. But I also think that there's a very strong case to retain square footage that occupiers are taking at the moment, mainly because they need to socially distance for an amount of time. So if you start to reduce your square footage now, it's going to be far too soon to do that, because you have to socially distance for a number of months that we don't know are coming forward. And sort of that's quite an interesting conversation, as well as, you know, Rob, as I say, you were talking about your residential sort of extension, and like how much space do you actually need to do what you want to do? So immediately it started looking as quite a nice architectural piece, but now it's going to probably need to be a bit more function over design, which, you know, was what we're all interested in anyway. So the two ways are sort of changing space to be more adaptable for social distancing. And, you know, Tim, we spoke before about, I'm sort of jumping all over the place here, but sort of thinking about business continuity planning.
Well, but as is the way of a conversation, of course, you leap
absolutely
around.
Well, just with myself, apparently. But business continuity planning has always been, you know, in terms of fire, in terms of security breach or terrorism, and now we've got a virus situation. So again, from a square footage perspective, both residential and commercial, wonder what that's going to do from a BCP
Sure. Well, we held on to those big chunks of real estate somewhere away from the main city centres, such that if anything proved difficult for us to be working in the city centre, then we go off to our other location, but actually didn't consider home. So I think you're right. There's going to be some real conversations now over, do we hang on to that business continuity space? Do we need that? It's broader than just the experiment of working from home now, but I think you're right. It's going to be a much more of a conversation.
I think that's going back to Victor's point about business continuity, and I think it's so important for businesses now to be building resilience into business strategy, but therefore workplace strategy as well, because you've got to be able to anticipate. Obviously, this is something that's completely unprecedented. No business has ever had to plan for anything like this before. So it's something that now needs to be factored in, and I think that's going back to the proactivity, is making sure that we take the lessons learned from this pandemic, reflect on how people adapted to the change and did so productively when working from home, and then ironing out all of the inefficiencies with regard to technology or collaboration, and making sure that there is a plan if, God forbid, anything like this were to happen again.
The beauty that goes across everything that you guys have just said for me is that we actually don't know the best way to communicate this right now. So, you know, with Mark's looking at proactive and reactive, I think if we went to our clients and said, do you think you're being reactive? They'd say yes, but they'd also want to be showing that they are being productive and proactive as well. So we have to be careful with the negativity side of that. And I think some of the conversations that we've had recently have been talking about the integrity of what our conversations are and what we're doing with our clients is actually saying, we don't know the best way to talk about this. We don't know the best way that's going to make your staff feel safe. We're trying to use some similar language to the media, but we're also trying to build our own sort of terminology and sort of narrative that actually gives you comfort around the facilities management side, the workplace side, the community side. So I think there is some level of integrity to say, we don't know the best way to talk about this. And actually it's got to be best suited for your business and your organization going forward.
Well, I was just going to pick up on what we were just discussing there around the sort of workplace resiliency. I think the only other thing that I was going to add in there is I think it's also around now, isn't it, the workforce resiliency. So that sense of how do we make sure that people are more fully prepared and engaged around more distributed working patterns, agile working, however we want to describe it, but just that sense of how we now want to be thinking about it for the future, so that making the most of the experiment that we've had to explore how we can have a way of working into the future which is more attuned to how we might be feeling post the experiment, post this sense of understanding and this collective view now over what it's like to be working outside of the office. I think it's going to be much more, and I'm glad to see it, but I think it'll be much more of a focus around how we really work with people to ensure that resiliency is there to manage the change. Of course, what's interesting is that somebody who spends their life around change management, we have something like this where if he's just forced to work from home all of a sudden with sort of zero change. So great that I think the human spirit has enabled us to undertake that with a degree of resiliency which is quite amazing. So therefore, how much better would it be if we can then take that experience, understand the good and the bad, and therefore implement it in a much more considered, thoughtful way, so that in the future we can be all a little bit more able to be working from different locations. I mean, those of us who are used to this, as I said before, when the thought of working from home is, well, I've been doing that for years, not all day, every day. So therefore, for those of us who are used to it, not too bad, but for everybody else, it's been quite a mammoth task. So workforce resilience, I think, is going to be one of those core elements moving forward.
And Tim, how would you, just from an occupier perspective or from a client perspective, how would you guide someone to start thinking about that for the future? What are the, particularly with your expertise in change management, how would you start gearing your clients up to start thinking about that going forward?
Well, I think the first part is to understand that having been having a few conversations with clients where people are saying, well, look, I'm keen just to get back into the office. And I think part of the conversation now has to be, well, in the past, we always talked about having the classic Venn diagram of people, process, place. Back, I'm showing my age now, going back to at least 20 years or so. I tend to describe it more as the physical, virtual, human in my own words these days. And the problem right now is that even if we just bring people straight back into and again, I'm assuming post the social distancing aspect, but bringing people back into a workplace where we now have a different set of expectations around the permission and the trust of working elsewhere than the main office, could be home, but could be any other third space, means that we now have a lack of alignment. So assuming that an appropriate kind of strategy was thought through and the building design responded to the elements around those physical, virtual, human elements, we've now got a misalignment where there was previously alignment. So even just bringing people back into the space that was means that you're bringing people in who now have an expectation of, well, I'd still like to be able to work from home a day or two a week or whatever suits me, with timing that suits me, with an ability to be able to use technology such as this to enable me to be working in a different way. So even that, I don't think, works just to bring people back in with an expectation that you go back to what it was beforehand of 4 or 5 days a week in the office. So there's an element there, but then secondly, if we broaden that out, the ability, as I said, to draw people in to help co-create whatever the new space might be, now that we've got the first time in history, really the ability for everybody to have an input to a conversation, because we've all had the same well, we've had the same experience of working from home in the sense that we have been working from home. Obviously, the experience itself has been completely different from individual to individual. But the sense that we can all now understand what that means for us, it means that we can start to recalibrate what does the office space do for us. So why would I go in? What would I do there? With whom? What sort of length of time? Which days would I go in? What does all that mean? Well, now we can really engage with people to help co-create that space into the future. So it's even more inspiring, because let's face it, it's going to have to be, isn't it? If we do pick up on that sense that people can be working elsewhere, therefore the choice of going into the office means that it has to be great.
Absolutely. And that choice of being able to work elsewhere as well is going to be, I think, something that's probably overcome quite a lot of hurdles already, in the sense of, we all know that there's a certain tier within a lot of organizations that struggle with the ability not to see their teams and not to work very, very closely with their teams. And, this is probably the best global change management program, Tim, I think we've ever been privy to, and it's sort of, it's done a lot of our
well, less of a change program and more of an enforced. I mean, it's when I think back to some previous projects as well, I won't name it because it'll give it away, where the senior people just said, well, look, give me a bullet point list of how you'd like people to behave in the future, and I'll just hand it out and we'll get people to do that. This is that kind of change management program. It's sort of change by instruction, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think those sort of, that tier that we as consultants all know and love to challenge and have those engagements with, I think for them, hopefully there's been a benefit for them in seeing how remote working can work. And, we've always said that you don't need to have people in the office, in front of you, because actually, if you think that they're being productive, there could be the same person sat in front of you with Facebook, programs, movies, doing whatever they, non-billable work in front of you. And just because they're now removed or working from a third place, their home, a coffee shop, a restaurant, they can still be as productive. So just being not able to see that person doesn't mean that productivity is less.
Particularly if you don't trust people to work the hours they're meant to be working, then why employ them in the first place? Because it's sort of the most base, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. I think I'm in total agreement. And what you said about why they're employing someone they don't trust. I mean, that is the bottom line. That's why I think line of sight management should be a thing of the past. If you're a manager who it may not be your entire team, it might be certain individuals that you genuinely don't trust to work, then there's some big issues there. There's the fact that, I mean, why are they in the position they're in the first place? And that person should feel kind of the sense of trust, and they should feel engaged with the culture, engaged with the business, engaged with their manager. And they should want to be productive. They shouldn't want to be kind of, as you said, sitting there on YouTube or Netflix or whatever. And they should not be in the position that they're in.
Yeah, it's a line management issue if people aren't truly being productive, and I think that's. But as we all know, we've worked with clients that when you start to get involved in any aspect around managing change and dealing with a workforce, you're dealing with all the aspects of how an organization actually ticks, how it operates, how it runs, and inevitably you end up having having a bit of a review of what is that performance looking like. And you're right, you see it all the time from the sort of middle senior managers saying, well, I need to make sure that I've got a good sense of my team. And very few will come out and say it directly in that sense of I don't trust, but there's sometimes that sense of sort of implicitly there in the conversation, the view that if I'm not really watching or keeping an eye on, then I'm not sure, when people are working from home. And of course, you've all heard it, haven't we? Working from home often has the pause before the expression, because it's a sense of, oh yes, so you're just sort of working part-time if you're working from home. I'm hopeful that that's really now, if that's gone, it's not going to be, an issue as we come back into the workplace. That we see now, that's partly an issue that we can close the door on that one and sort of carry on with it, because I think that view of the way of working is it's historic. It should be a thing of the past. And as we were saying before, that sense of people wanting to get back into the office space anyway, we know there are some differences creeping in between the different generations. So for those who are, and again, another sweeping generalization creeping out here, but that sense of elements of the slightly older generation who may have access to more space at home, or the little working space at the bottom of the garden, perhaps slightly less keen to come back now than those of a younger generation, where if you're flat sharing, house sharing, you've got less space. But equally, if you've built up a real camaraderie in the team, you want to get back and continue with that. And so I think we're seeing a bit of that switch round, with a view that it was always felt that the millennials and the younger generation were always the ones that wanted to have the distributed working, more agile working, and older ones less so. Of course, that's switching round, I think, as part of the recent experiences.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the home is never going to replace the office. It's an extension of the office. And it's just what this...
And it's not binary, is it? We know that.
Yeah.
It's not a case of home or office. It's lots of other locations. We're just seeing, I think, home as it's just one of the examples.
Yeah, exactly. And as I mentioned earlier, continuous homework is definitely not the future. And given the current circumstances, everyone has had the opportunity to prove themselves through their output, and obviously their managers have been forced to change in the way in which they trust their staff. And now that they've realised that they can work productively from home, it's not something they're going to be doing for 5 days a week long into the future, but it just gives them that flexibility to fit it around their personal life, to fit it around the tasks in hand. I mean, for me, as I mentioned earlier, I've always been very transient, but for virtually all work styles and all tasks that I do in my day-to-day life, the office is the best environment for that, apart from focused individual work. But that's just me. I'm good at controlling my distractions, or potential distractions at home. And
you can work through them.
Yeah, exactly. And if I don't need to collaborate with someone, then I think, well, why should I come into the office? Yes, there are those spaces provided for me in the office, because it is an activity-based working environment, but I can save myself on the commute, and I know that I can achieve my tasks and carry out my tasks in a shorter period of time than I would do in the office. And I think a lot of people have now realised that, and hopefully they can take that forward.
I hope so. I think one of the things for me is that there's a question over, do we hold on to the experience that we've had and the way it's opened minds and eyes to potentially a different way of working, or do we go back and somehow regress into, and I'm going to put it that way, which is like a slightly pejorative way of describing it, to say regress feels like that's going backwards, but I think in a way it is almost going backwards into the way that we might have been working before. And I'm hoping that we don't, and that we do make the most of this. There was a colleague who posted something on social media, and a reference around, rather than thinking about going back to the workplace, was referencing about thinking about moving forwards into the workplace. And I like that idea of considering how you want to work and how we want to work now. So let's think of what the future state ought to be, rather than going back to something that actually never was, and let's face it, was never, the panacea. So maybe we should now be thinking about, well, let's just pull in all that we know so that we create something that's better than it was before.
There's certainly been a lot of people that I know that are very, very intelligent, driven, high performers, that have really struggled with the change in terms of motivation, in terms of routine. So it's sort of going back to a little bit of what you said earlier, Tim, about your 2 stages to start thinking about, and how we change or help advise people in thinking about the longer term, is for management thinking about the impact of remote working on some of those people that are struggling in that sense, and or people like Mark who really are completely isolated and haven't got that social interaction. Mark is like one of the most diligent, process-driven, data-driven people that I've met, and so pleased that we have him on board. Mark, I think it's fair to say you've had your low days, right? So you've had your days where you've just not really wanted to do anything because it's got to 6, 7, 8 weeks, and actually you were very unfortunate that you had a back problem that meant that you were laid up 3 to 4 weeks before the lockdown even happened. So you've probably been in more lockdown territory than anyone else. And I think for managers, and certainly for me, having to be able to adapt to that was sort of, look, just take the time. Like, we know that you're a high performer, we know that you're diligent in your job, but take the space. And certainly for Rob, we've you know, we've worked together getting around your daughter's routine and around your wife's calls, and sort of having to adapt to that as well. And I think for management going back into what the office could look like going forward, there's going to be a lot of those considerations they need to think about as well, and potentially be more flexible in themselves and thinking about deliverables and thinking about deadlines. You know, I'm really proud to say that I've got a really fantastic team, but we've all had our low days. And actually, to Miles's point, it's not working from home 5 days a week. It's knowing that we have the ability to do that if we want to. But if we need the ability or want to have the facility to come back and join together and collaborate, then we should be able to do that as well. So it's sort of
it's the permission and trust is what I think it comes back to.
Yeah.
We know it's not binary, it's not 100%. It's what works well for me as an individual, and that's what I'm hoping that we hold on to as we come out of this. That we hold on to that sort of human aspect to it. That enables us all to be able to give our best within a way that works well for us as well as the organisation.
I think the most positive way of saying it from my point of view is now hopefully the presenteeism myth that was becoming a more traditional thing. Once that's been busted and you have that release of trust and that release of flexibility, you can then, it takes its through us from what Miles was saying about activity-based working, you can then start to seek the best conditions for each individual task. You can plan your day better based around conditions that's going to make you the most effective, because you know how you work, you know what makes you tick, so you can go off and do those things. And like you say, if it's home for concentrated work, that's great. If it's the office for collaborative work, that's great. But if it's you know, the office to do individual work because you can't do it at home, that's also great. It's the flexibility that releases those handcuffs that were previously maybe just had a slight inhibitor on being the best productive you could be in all your tasks at hand.
Well, it was more than a slight inhibitor. I mean, the way that I think about it is that when you think of the workplace strategies done in the past, and we've all looked at the agile working, activity-based working, and the ability to be a bit more distributed and choice and autonomy and all those elements that create a great working environment, and not just within but also without the office. Part of what was lacking was that permission and trust to be able to spend more time working from other locations if that's what the individual wanted to do. So when you create those strategies, you are delivering maybe, I don't know, 80% of the value. My hope is that we can now unlock 100% of the value of being able to work differently, because that permission and trust levels have now reached the point where all of us can have the conversation with line managers over what works best for all of us, rather than it being, I can, as a line manager thinking, well, I'm happy for you to be sort of activity-based working through this office space, but not so much if it's outside of that. So hopefully we've unlocked that sort of last remaining percentage of value.
Absolutely, yeah.
We lost Miles.
Come back, Miles.
Was it something we said?
The integrity of this piece is that we don't know what the future will be, but we're providing you with some thoughts and considerations as you move forward. And Tim, what was that note you mentioned from your colleague on social media? It was moving forward.
Yeah, it's not moving back to the office, it's moving forward to the office.
Moving forward to the office. I quite like that. I think
it is nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's from Samuel Liberant. He was on my team out in the States when I was out there. So I employed him. So that's the reason why he's good, but he would be good because I employed him. And I mean that I employed him because he was good. I hasten to add that it was almost coming out like I'd made some big transformation in his character. No, he was always very good. But he now works for NBBJ over in LA. But he came out with this great sense of it's not going back to the office, it's going forward to the office. And I thought and I said it on social media, so that's why I'm happy to repeat it, saying that's a really good way of thinking about it, because it's a really good way of thinking about it. Mm.
So as a collective, the integrity of this piece and this process was around actually being quite honest and kind of suggesting that we don't really know what the future holds, but at a revolutionary point in kind of workplace consultancy, we've seen what industrial revolutions have done in the past and what factories and office places have led to. What are the 3 best recommendations going forward?
I can start. I feel as a strategist, it's a good place to start with the planning. So, like you correctly say, Rob, it's going to be difficult, and we use the word again and a lot, and unprecedented. I sound like Boris Johnson now, but it's a lot of. I think a lot of people, a lot of our partners and clients speaking to us are saying, you know, you need. They're engaging with us to find out what it's going to be. But I'd say engage with those that are going to make the decisions the most. Engage with your staff. Find out what they want. Every workplace is going to have a different blend, a different mix. You need to start to engage. And once you engage, obviously, as a strategist and the data analyst, it's having the capability in-house to collect that data and to start to build the bigger picture and the roadmap. And I don't think you're going to answer these questions before you've got a couple of months worth of data, maybe. You know, how many empty desks are you experiencing once everyone's given the option to either work from home or until you can answer these types of questions, we can't answer these questions for you either. So my top 3 things would be engage, data collection, and to throw one in on top there, I'd really be focusing on a well-being strategy, because that's going to make your return to work the positive experience as well. So that answers no questions of what it's going to be like in the future, but it's going to help us get there.
It gives good insight there.
I really like that, Mark. For me personally, I think we've, you know, I'm really grateful to have all 4 of you join this call, because I truly believe in what we do, and that we've always given the best advice to our clients. We're not here to problem solve, because we can't problem solve. So the first one for me is, for our clients, don't try to fix it. Don't do your best to fix everything, because you can't, and you also don't know what's going to happen going forward. We don't know what advice is going to come from the government in the next couple of weeks, and we don't know how long the social distancing or the long-term, short-term plan is going to be in place. So don't try or feel that you have to fix everything. I think the fact that you're responding in a way that makes your client and your organization feel safe is good enough for the short term. My second one would be to make sure, in sort of validating what Mark says, is to engage with your staff and to understand what their feeling is and what their learning was around flexible working from home. Would they want to continue to do it? What do they miss from the office? But thirdly, if they do miss the office, to challenge why they miss the office. So if it's something that is around collaboration and meeting people and those serendipity moments at the tea point or as you're walking through reception, to maybe think about advising them that for a long time that's not going to be the case, and to think about that and how you further support your divisions and your organisation to get used to that change. So they would be my top.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think I'd go with similar ones, really. I think firstly, it is a sense of just take a moment to think about where we're at and where do you want to be. So it's partly picking up on Mark's elements too around the strategy side. So as we were saying before, think about where the first one is really think about how we want to go, how we want to be moving forward into the office, to use that expression again. So let's just take a moment to think about that before reacting to anything. It's understanding that whatever we do, there is now a sense of misalignment between the workplace as it was and the expectations of the workforce as they are now, because I think we'd like to be spending a bit more time out of the office, or at least have the choice and the permission to carry on doing that, whatever's best for us. And therefore, the third element would be, so when we then do look at what we want the office to be in the future, let's make sure that we really co-create it with people, because we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to truly understand from staff what has been their experience and how do we draw upon those experiences to create the inspiring, awesome, amazing office space that it'll need to be to draw people back into it, to do whatever it is that we need to do back in the office space. So I think those are probably my top 3.
I think that, going back to Tim's point, recognising that staff's expectations have changed. It's inevitable that they would have, especially for those that didn't typically work from home very often. People will now be expecting to have that flexibility if they previously didn't. And they're going to be expecting different from their office. The old workplace model that we see in many offices, that is just rows and rows of desks, very binary in terms of the choice of work setting. So it's just a desk or a meeting room. But even the activity-based working environment, still they have a very high dependence on desks. But if, as I mentioned earlier, people are going to be choosing to work from home for a specific style of working. So in my case, it would be individual focused work, but for some others, it may be admin work. It's about recognizing the expectations of change and making sure, I think this is probably going to go on to my next point now, which is gathering that data from your staff, be it qualitative or quantitative. But I think mainly from a qualitative perspective, because you need to be gathering perspectives on what was inefficient pre-COVID, what the desires are of the future, how well they were supported whilst they're working from home, what they're expecting to see in their new office, and making sure that we're translating that into a future-proof and resilient strategy. And then I think that takes me on to my third point, which is the resilience. I think that we need to take the lessons learned. I think I did a blog last week and I mentioned the quote, "Never let a good crisis go to waste," which apparently was what Churchill said before the formation of the United Nations after World War II. So I think organisations need to take a leaf out of Churchill's book. They need to learn from the hardships of this period and make sure that they're building the lessons that have been learned into the resilience of the workplace of the future. So making sure that they're addressing business continuity in their workplace strategies and making sure that they have the flexibility to cater for periods like this in the future.
Perfect.
That's great.
Just to summarise, obviously it's tough times at the moment, but as an interior designer, it's hugely exciting. Like this is what it's not what you wait for, but it's something to get your teeth into. It's an opportunity to actually make some changes and reflect that. And the only way I believe that you can genuinely do that is through not getting carried away and to listen, to understand and collect that data. You've all touched on the data element, and not to rush into it and collect what the important piece and what the important pieces of the puzzles are first before we start designing, before we get carried away. So I think my key takeaway would be not get carried away. Don't rush into kind of throwing furniture at things and making drastic changes. Just take a step back, analyze it, study it, and then come up with something that is ingenious, that is creative, that is wonderful, and a space and spaces that truly inspire, whether it be on a corporate level, on an SME level. Let's really get people wanting to go back into the office for all the right reasons.
Definitely. I think that's creating that destination workplace is going to be so important, because people are going to realise that the flexibility of the future of work and how they will be allowed to work from home, because many people didn't have that option in the past. So how are you going to attract people back into the office? That is the question that needs to be asked and at the top of the agenda of any discussions with regard to real estate.